Thank you so much for being here today. It's exciting to have a fantastic lineup of panelists that are joining us to speak about a very important topic. And before we start, it's great to be in Amsterdam, the epicenter of innovation for centuries, and a place I used to call home for almost 6 years. And a while back, actually, biking in the rain on Nataraja Street, I picked up a local newspaper to really familiarize myself with local events, what's happening, what's new. And what struck me the most is actually looking back 10 years ago, when I worked at a startup here, we did not talk as vividly about consumer privacy as we're doing it today. And it's actually refreshing and exciting to bring this topic front and center, which is very critical to you as businesses and to us as users. So before we start, I want to quickly introduce myself. I am Tatiana. I'm on the PlayBD product specialist team. I focus on Android platform privacy changes and play policies. And without further ado, I'd love to ask every panelist to introduce themselves, and we can take it from there.
Sure. Hi, my name is Bruce Gustafson. My little badge says, talk to me about Washington, D.C. So I'm the head of the Developers Alliance. We're a little advocacy group. You could call me a lobbyist. We have offices in DC and Brussels, and so I represent the developer community on issues that are important to us in front of lawmakers. So privacy has been a big chunk of what we've been working for the last little bit.
Hello, everyone. I'm Parul. So I'm in the same team as Tatiana, and I'm currently leading an initiative that's focused on working with third-party SDK developers to kind of improve apps and games.
Hey everyone, this is Vinay. I work for Lyft. Lyft is a ride-sharing business, operates in America and Canada. My job is to help developers build a secure product. I'm an engineer manager for the product security team. Previously, I worked at Salesforce, did a similar job there as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So first question is really more foundational, something that it's important to ask. And we know that every developer wants to be successful, launch a fantastic app and game, and really see the conversion happening, see that global expansion, materializing, and maximize revenue. And we know user experience and also trust experience is a critical factor to really have a good business. And we know there's so much information that you can read about this and kind of educate yourself, but I wonder from your firsthand experience and perspective, how would you even advise today someone to really think privacy first?
Yeah, good start.
I'll go.
I'll
go.
Sorry. Okay, go ahead.
Fall.
Me first. So, it's interesting, right? So, and I talk to, developers all the time, and
Yep.
sort of the first question they say to us is, yeah, this privacy stuff, we read about it, what do we actually do, right? Like, I just want to know what to do. Just tell me what to do. I think, the first step is way easy because it's just, put yourself in the user's shoes and
Yep.
sort of be respectful, right? So, do what sort of makes good sense. Be transparent, right? Make sure that if you're asking for data, you tell people what that's all about. If you need to go beyond that, I mean, there's sort of, as you said, there's lots of opportunities to learn.
Yep.
I think there's lots of certification programs, all kinds of things that you can get involved with. We're involved with some of those, so that'll be where I'd steer you.
So I think from my perspective, and also like having spoken to so many of the developers, one of the guidance we always give is make sure that every time you build an app, think about the context, the clarity, all the data permissions and things that you need, and also keep in mind that as a developer, you're responsible for everything that's in your app. So the reason why we are currently just starting this initiative of working with third-party library developers, but we often hear this thing from developers that, hey, I'm not doing this. This SDK that I was using was responsible for it. And I'd be like, did you not review the SDK? So make sure that you have enough practices that, one, you're creating a good framework of before integrating any library, you're doing all the checks and balances. You're creating a framework of why you're using the data, how you're using it, and then sharing that information with the app developer, user, telling them that this is the reason why we need a particular data set.
Yeah, when I work with developers, most of the time, they need certain access to certain data. Most of them don't know why they need it. So it's kind of asking them to define what is the essential data that need for the app to work, and what are the not essential but useful data for other purposes, and kind of bifurcating that, and then looking at the non-essential data and see if we can reduce the scope as little as possible. That way you can even remove a permission if you're not requiring that particular data. And also, once you have that essential data, you kind of have to categorize it as well, like looking at if it's PII, it needs to be treated in a different way. If it's logging data, it should be treated in a different way. So kind of drilling it down to a level where you can actually do some actions on it, that'll be really useful.
And this is actually a perfect segue. So pivoting a little bit to the next question around trust. We're still on the trust factor, which is like very important to build a sustainable digital world. And when you think about as a developer and as a business in general today, you definitely have practices in place that you want to apply, have a data strategy, which we talked about. But as a consumer, how do you actually build that threaded relationship with your user to actually tell them, I'm doing everything I can to keep your business safe and trusted? How would you go about that to build that relationship?
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. So I guess that's where the context, clarity, and having these practices that we were talking about really comes in place. So something you raise a good question about trust is sharing a stat, 49% of the permissions that are denied are basically because a user really doesn't understand why is this permission needed to perform that basic functionality of the app. So having clarity around those use cases has definitely, we've seen like an uptick, because the moment you tell a user that, hey, this is the reason I need this information and this is how it will improve the experience, I'm much more likely to accept and understand, because you're being transparent and clear on why you need certain data point. So.
Yeah, I think Parul kind of got it right. The context is really important. One thing that I advise my developers is to look at from an opt-in perspective than an opt-out, kind of making it clear why you want that particular access makes it very easy for a user to understand and at least trust that application is not misusing certain data. So giving that context certainly helps. And if you're building an app, like putting my developer hat on, it's usually hard, because when you're building an app, you do want to take all the permissions as you require, because you're building it from scratch. But at some point, you need to look back and take a look at how do you reduce the permissions, or try to remove certain permissions and check if the app breaks. And that way you can limit it to as little permissions as you can.
Yeah.
So it's actually, yeah, go ahead.
No, sorry, I was just like going to add that, another interesting point that you touched upon, that limit the collection. And so, there is a lot of liability also that comes in place if with the more data that you have and the amount of time period that you need to use it for. So having those practices is like, do I really need it? You maybe had a use case 1 year ago. Make sure that you're doing these consistent checks. So I'm sure like whether it's monthly or something, where you have a process in place where you're checking as to what all data is being accessed, it's being secured, encrypted. Do I still need to use this data? Are there alternatives available? So these are like some important practices.
This is actually a very interesting perspective, because we are sort of defaulting today and in the past to just get the access, right? And thinking about sort of like the value of that data's post effect. And right now, more and more, the narrative is shifting towards like, but how can I think about this like in the early stage, when I prototype, when I develop my product, because it is possible to embed it. It is possible. And I know, Vinay, you shared a few experiences before, how you did this with your own team, but love to hear your perspective, how you think about this early stage.
Yeah, for sure. I think when we look at from a security angle, we look at the whole process that's from the design phase to the end product, and we can see where we can put security and privacy in every check of the place. For example, in the design phase, you can have a template which asks for like, can you think about security or privacy in that design section? That way you are, as you're developing the design, you're actually writing privacy-related things and security-related things in there. Maybe during check-in, when checking the code into GitHub, you can kind of have certain checks in place which will check if there is secrets in code or if it's doing a privacy violation. And so you can have dynamic testing in the development process itself. One thing that what's useful for us is once we have the whole development process in the place, there is certain checks which all the bugs cannot be found. So we have a bug bounty program as well, which kind of helps us to get those bugs and catch those bugs and then learn from those bugs and feed it back into the process so that we find those bugs as early as possible.
Yeah.
And that exposure of a program like that, that's like a mind shift that has to happen. Someone actually like, hey, it's okay to delegate. It's okay to have that shared responsibility, which is collective. But yeah, curious to hear what you think about this as well.
Yeah, so bug bounty program or vulnerability disclosure programs, this is like something that, even at Google, we kind of highly advocate for developers to have something. And having this program, it essentially creates a framework for researchers, people out there, or even as a user, provides me a way to kind of report to you if there's any problem. And we often hear from developers that sometimes people look at it as that, oh, is it a weakness that I'm putting out, like, come find problems with me? It's actually not, because security is not something that one company can really be perfect at. So having some sort of a program, if anything, adds a lot of PR value, because it shows to the community that you're quite serious about security and privacy at your company.
And I think it's important to get in, you're writing code, you're getting ready to do stuff. There's a lot of things you can do in advance of that even, right?
Yeah.
So under the privacy rules nowadays, you are going to be asked at some point to find an individual user's data and package it all up and send it to them, or delete it, or whatever, right? So before you write a line of code, you need to think about your data strategy and where am I going to put stuff and how am I going to structure it, right? Because being able to reach into that architecture is going to be critically important, right? If you already have an app, do a bit of an audit and figure out where all the data is, right? Is it on some intern's laptop someplace?
Yep.
Have I got it locked down, right?
Yep.
Because, that's sort of a precursor to anything else that you're going to build in the background.
Yeah. And this is sort of like where probably will be helpful to understand real examples, maybe where the experience was personalized, but it was not in conflict with privacy. I don't know if you have any first-hand experiences like that. You can share.
Yeah, in the Lyft app itself, there's a particular feature where you share a link code or a referral code to a friend. When we ask users to go to the page, we want users to provide their contacts access just because it makes it easier for the whole process. But when we develop that, we kind of put that in mind, telling that this is actually a privacy concern. We don't need the contact access. It just makes the whole process easier. So we try to develop the page such that we can display why we are doing it. And also there is an opt-out option. There is a link you can copy and then share it yourself. So there is always a opt-out option, so you don't need to share contact access, but the contact access is clearly explained that you only use it for this particular feature.
Yeah, I guess, and that's where since you mentioned in the contact, so there are obviously certain runtime permissions which is very clear. So if you're trying to share a photograph with your friend and you ask for camera access, yes, you don't need to put a prominent disclosure telling me why you need it. It's clear that why you need that access.
Yep.
However, giving one of our apps example, one of the Nest products. So I was using this app, getting into my house, and I noticed they had very clearly explained that why they needed my location, because I was getting to the near the house location. They needed to know so that they can turn up my air conditioning in the house and do everything. Yep. So the good thing about that was they also broke the access. So they did not ask me for giving location access all the time.
Yep.
It was only when I wanted to open the app or when I was getting, when I was about to reach home and I was using the app. So I guess having that distinction and clearly telling the user definitely helps.
Right, and I think you can minimize data likewise so location is a great example. So I have a little app that sort of tracks my keys. I leave them behind sometimes, right?
Yep.
And rather than sort of track my keys and wherever they go, which would be very intrusive, right? They're very clear that what they do is they just track the last known location, right? So,
Yep.
and there's no need to keep this trail. So once the data is no longer useful to them, they pitch that, right? Which is a lot more comforting, and they have a nice clear policy. I actually read privacy policies that sort of lays that out, right? So because otherwise, like I said, I don't want to be tracked. So it was a useful refinement.
We were actually talking about this over coffee earlier, and also going through the keynote that we had this morning. It's there's definitely like best practices and a variety of use cases that we need to cater for, local nuances, regional nuances, right, that developers should be cognizant about. And it does pose some sort of like complexity too, because you have to think about your distribution channel, your revenue, your business model, and privacy comes on top, right? That's sort of like another angle, which is also critical to take into account. And I do think like this question is interesting to ask around your team composition, like your hiring strategy. How do you build a team around this complexity? Who are those people that are on your team? What type of skill set do you look for? Do you need new people on your team to really deal with privacy and security first? Or, so I'm curious, like from your perspective, like how should businesses navigate this today, hiring?
Yeah, hiring, it depends on the risk appetite of the business. If you're a small company, you kind of think of security as an investment because let's say you have security bugs and you're not putting that investment right in the beginning. If you don't have that foundation, on the long run, you're going to accumulate a lot of debt, and that's going to hurt your business. So thinking about what your risk appetite is and how do you kind of make sure you have good processes in the beginning and have that foundation of security built in is super important. And also in this, at least right now, it's DevOps, it's kind of everything is blended in. There's no development cycle, there's no testing phase, everything goes together. In this kind of environment, we think of security as more of adding more automation to the whole process. Look at places where you could make it more easier for someone to basically auto-fix the bugs or auto-find the stuff and tell them as soon as possible. That way it certainly helps. So blending both security, at least more people, and also adding automation certainly helps to kind of scale security and privacy.
I think you should hire more lawyers. No, so, and because I'm a lawyer. I was an engineer once, but I think, I mentioned earlier that there are some great certifications out there that are online that are recognized throughout this, this big legal privacy community that can teach you both at sort of if you want to be the high-level legal person, if you want to be right down in the tactical stuff. Yep. It's a marketable thing. There are lots of people that are looking for privacy professionals, and it's like I said, it's right down from techniques, technology, up to sort of the philosophy of where GDPR came from. And I would encourage people to look that stuff up. IAPP is one. That's a good one.
Yeah. So definitely like building an automation, trying to really kind of scale through vendors, right? But also looking like, you mentioned, Bruce, once also like sort of like thinking ahead mentality, that is needed. Like,
well, it is.
even
I think the entire team, you don't have to be a specialist in any particular area.
Yeah.
And like I said, we're always, the problem shows up in front of us and we're just quick to dive in and start trying to solve the tough stuff, right? The fun stuff. But, you got to take a breath and say, where is this going to lead me? How can I structure some stuff, at least for a minute, and then before you sort of blaze through. And having a little knowledge about what privacy law requires, and then thinking back about what would a user expect, how can I be transparent about what I'm doing? How can I avoid surprises? There's a lot of things that you can do on that side, just common sense stuff. Right?
I think it's also interesting that Developer Alliance also has sort of like, robust principles that you share with the community, and you also vet those with the developers themselves. I think it would be good to kind of have that in front of us all the time to remind ourselves, like, hey, it starts with values as a core team, what you stand for, what you don't stand for. So definitely check their website. I think this question is also very interesting to pose, and we know that a lot of developers heavily rely on third-party libraries, and that's a fact because you actually need to augment the experience within the app and the game. You actually want to make it more compelling, and the added valuable services only do this for the best of the user, right? But eventually, sometimes you have dependencies that could jeopardize the app, right? Their privacy, their security breaches that could happen. So do you have nuggets of wisdom how to collaborate with third-party libraries to make sure that you have a safe and private app today? But more so like tactically, what a developer should do and how should they think about it?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I joined the team a year and a half ago just to kind of pilot and see that, we noticed that majority of the code in an app actually comes from third-party libraries,
Yeah.
and half of the time developers don't really put in a lot of effort in reviews. So for me, and I understand the pain points because, if I am a developer, especially if I'm starting out, I need something to fix a quick problem. I go to GitHub, I search for it, I integrate it.
Yeah.
So there are certain efforts that we are taking on our end, but definitely, one of the things, like I mentioned earlier, is that you're ultimately the owner of the entire app and the experience. So making sure that once you integrate the library, you do have sufficient tests in place and see all the permissions that they're accessing. So just because your app needs location permission to form its basic functionality does not mean that your battery optimization SDK also needs that. So I guess that's where developers need to kind of spend a little bit more time in terms of making sure that when they're integrating these libraries, how the data transfer happens is something that they're constantly checking. So we are going to be, and we are putting in some effort and kind of categorizing, identifying, because at the end of the day, SDKs is a really vast ecosystem. You'd probably know. So we are trying to categorize and come up with some frameworks around, but yeah, I would say still the basic checks and balances in place are extremely important.
Now, can you relate to that experience, as a developer?
I think third-party library is a really hard problem to solve in general, just because it gives you so much value when you add a third-party library into your product, but also it's a big problem. I think one of the things that I suggest developers is kind of do the basic due diligence checks, make sure it's a maintained code, make sure there are a lot of updates being done, someone is actually working on the particular third-party library, and also do some due diligence checks. There's a lot of open source tools that you can use to scan and kind of find any security bugs there. And also remember that third-party library could be your weakest link on your code. Most of the times when there is a bug that is found in the third-party library, especially a security bug, a lot of hackers kind of get that information and try to scan every app which has that bug. So when you do include third-party library, make sure you update it, kind of have that cadence to go and update it regularly. One thing we do as kind of helping the community is we put all the open source projects that we have as part of a bug bounty program. So if anyone finds any bug in our open source repositories, we pay them, and also we kind of fix them quickly and give it to all our partners.
I mean, that is an excellent point, right? I mean, this is, libraries are kind of a collective asset, right? And anything that, if you find something in some code that you're using, I mean, you need to feed it back to the community, you need to tell the people that wrote it, we need to constantly help each other improve, right? There are, so that there are sort of organizations out there that are saying, we have some automated testing tools, we'd love to just put it on GitHub and let it run everything it can find, right? So, I think collectively we have a responsibility to sort of help move this forward. So I'd encourage you guys to sort of think about how you could improve the code base for everyone, right?
Yeah. So I would really add on to the point that you said about updatability, because that's something we've noticed, especially with, Tatiana has been part of those few policy escalations, where half of the time what we see in developers is that they don't update the library. So a library that was released 6 years ago is not really meeting all the security and privacy requirements and not compatible with the latest platform. Or it might be compatible, performing its basic functionality, but due to certain changes in the platform, it's not really meeting the security bar. So yes, the updatability is very important. Do not use code that's not maintained, and make sure that you're regularly updating. And on the bug bounty, so we have something called the Google Play Security Rewards Program, through which any developer can go set up their private bug bounty. It's fairly simple. They can basically partner with this third-party company called HackerOne, and even select and A/B test that only 5 researchers are given access to the app. But the advantage of that is that once, if there is a vulnerability identified, you fix it, and you pay the researcher. Google actually also on top of that rewards the researcher after it has been fixed, communicated, and then that data on the vulnerabilities is fed back to the system, which makes sure that there are no other apps out there also with the same problem, and it also improves the app ecosystem and the OS.
Bruce, do you hear that with the community? Do they actually ask you questions about SDKs and like?
I mean, they do, and
Yeah.
you know, I mean, we get it two ways. We get one, you know, why the heck is everyone always updating policies on the
Yeah.
platforms and that sort of stuff? And I try to explain that, you know, the world sort of forces that to happen. But you know, how do we ensure that, you know, that I'm using sort of something that's robust? And I think, you know, to Parul's point, it's, you know, the source is important. If it's on, you know, there's tools that come with some of the robust platforms that are way useful. So I encourage you to stay close to, you know, Google and people like that that are doing work for us. And but yeah, I mean, it's a concern, absolutely, right?
And it feels like it feeds to the ultimate message that the app content is developers' responsibilities,
Right.
any business responsibility to kind of take more serious. If there's like one piece of wisdom that you can share with the audience to kind of let them know this is important, think about this, what would that be?
I mean, for me, there's three. Sorry, it's transparency, it's security,
Yeah.
and don't surprise anybody. So if
Yeah.
if you've asked for data for a certain reason, you know, don't do anything that the user would one day look at and say, what
Yeah.
the hell are they up to, right?
Yeah.
Trust like that. We need trust, or their users disappear.
Okay, I would say there are a few key themes. For me, number one would be like, making sure that why you need the data.
Yeah.
Once you've identified all the different sets that you need, try to find out, are there alternatives available?
Yep.
So something that we noticed a lot, so I mean, some of you as developers might have gone through the entire SMS call log policy change, but we actually identified that the majority of the developers that were using the permission did not really need it for the primary functionality of the app. A lot of them were using it for OTP verification, which could have simply been done by using a SMS retriever API. And similarly, we had like a lot of other cases where, as an app, you need to know that a user is, whether he or she is on a call or not. And then what you end up doing is you take the phone state permission when there is an alternative available in the audio focus API. So I think as a platform, we've come really far, and we have a lot of privacy-friendly alternatives available most of the time. So make sure that you do your due diligence instead of first just collecting anything that's out there. And I guess the transparency, like you pointed out, is like giving context and clarity, and always ensuring that that's very clear as a user that this is why you need it, this is how it will be used, and it's only for the time period that it's needed.
Yep.
I think one important point that I usually, most of the time when I interact with developers, they want to do the right thing. It's just that they don't have all the information that they need. It's just good to just step back as soon as you're building something to think about security and privacy. Just having that conversation about security and privacy will go a long way, because that will give you key pointers which you can use to build the app, and also put some process in place to catch security bugs earlier in the process than the later stage.
Perfect. We're at time, and just to sum up, I think this is fantastic. App context matter. Build that transparency. Build that trust. Definitely pose the question: do I really need this data? Right? Like have some sort of like categorization system, data strategy, and definitely think about your team, the way it's structured today, how it's set up to actually build for success and make you more happy as a developer. So thank you so much for this perspective. It's super valuable, and I hope this is not the last of the panel that we're going to have on this topic. But I appreciate your time.
Delightful.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you.